Hi class, Professor Brendan here. We are talking about fallacies today. Now fallacies, there are a lot of fallacies. If you've read the chapter in your textbook, you know there are a lot. We are not going to cover every single one of those today. We are going to focus on the ones that are often used, often talked about, with few new ones that you haven't heard before. But the point is for you to understand, how do fallacies happen, or how do people use them? When do they occur? How to identify them? Things like that. So let's get to that. I'm going to pull up the PowerPoint, and this is for my argumentation class. And the title of this particular lecture is called Fallacies in Reasoning. So let's go to it right now. Okay, so there we are. And I imagine that this particular lecture is going to take 3 or 4. You know me, it always takes a little while. So when we talk about fallacies in reasoning, what do we mean by that? How do we define what a fallacy is? Well, the first thing you want to keep in mind is there's no absolutes when it comes to fallacies. And as we talk about fallacies, you're going to see overlap. So there's arguments to be made to say, you know what, that sounds like a hasty generalization fallacy. And then part of it might sound like appeal to tradition. Okay, so sometimes there are things about it, like particular aspects about erroneous reasoning, that sounds like certain types of fallacies. It's not so important that you recognize exactly what fallacy it is. That's a nice talent to have. It's more important that you recognize that it's erroneous. And that's what I'm after for you as a class, that you're able to recognize when there's fallacious reasoning happening. Okay, so there's no absolute uniformity in a way a fallacy is labeled, defined, or treated. Okay, so there's no absolute uniformity, meaning people approach it differently. You can point out different flaws in an argument and say, oh, that sounds like a red herring fallacy. And then they go, no, it doesn't. It's really ad hominem. Now, those are two different things, but it depends on what it is. A failure in the reasoning of an argument that renders it invalid. So that's the thing you need to know about fallacies is once there's a fallacy in an argument, when you're able to recognize that, the argument then becomes invalid. It's not a true argument. It can't even be argued. It doesn't make sense, right? We're back to thinking about arguments. Do they make sense? Something that makes sense. Why does it make sense? When we look at inductive reasoning fallacies, the first one that we're really, really familiar with is hasty generalization, right? We know that one. People do it all the time. We rush to judgment, right? We rush to judgment about something without having all the facts. And that's one way to think of it. But another way to really think it is we've experienced something, a small sample of something. Could be a group of people, could be an experience, could be, let's take roller coasters, for instance. Let's decide you have a bad experience with one roller coaster, and you decide, now those of us that have gone on roller coasters know that all roller coasters are different. They're not all the same. But let's just take roller coasters. You decide, roller coasters aren't for me. I went on that one and I'm never doing it again. They're all bad. That's a hasty generalization, arriving at a broad conclusion based upon a very small sample. Now, I made one up. It's a little fun one. The first time Eric travels to Thailand, he meets 3 Thai women who don't shave their armpits. Eric comes home from wherever he's from. Let's say he's from Australia. And he tells his friends in Australia that women from Thailand don't shave their armpits. That's a hasty generalization. He met 3 women. How does he know that the rest of women that are from Thailand don't shave their armpits? He doesn't. Hasty generalization. But people do it all the time, right? They do it all the time. All right. So what's erroneous, what makes an argument invalid is It's invalid because you can't generalize 3 instances of something. So what does it take? This is how we end up talking a long time. What does it take? Let's say Eric travels to Thailand, and let's say they're in Thailand. I'm just making this up, okay? He travels to Thailand and he does a survey. He does a study. So he surveys, there's a population, let's say there's 30,000 Thai women that live in Thailand from the ages from 18 to 35. I'm making this up. There's 30,000. And he is able to take a sampling of 22,000 of those Thai women. Now, 22,000 of the Thai women, that's a big sampling. That's more than half. It's not the total. 22. Let me think about it for a minute. A third of 30,000 is 10. So it's more than 2/3, right? Not 3/4, but it's more than 2/3. That he might be able to say, if all of those women, the 22,000 of the 30,000 women in Thailand don't shave their armpits, you might be able to say women in Thailand don't shave their armpits. Why? Because this sampling is so large that it would suggest that it's very likely, this is inductive reasoning, it's very likely that if of those 22,000 that were surveyed and they were all didn't do that, that nobody did. It was part of the culture. Okay, so you have to have a huge sampling of something to not make a hasty generalization. It can't be so small as 3 or 1 experience like a roller coaster. Okay, we're clear on that? Let's go to the next one. Fallacy of composition. Falsely assuming what is true of each part is true about the whole. Do you see how this is similar to hasty generalization? You see, because there's a little connection there. I just want to see, right? It's about the small, making an assumption about, well, in this case, falsely assuming what is true of each part is true about the whole. So what is in a part represents how everyone is. That's similar to that broad conclusion piece. Okay, and I gave you the example of each grain of sand in the sandbox hardly weighs anything at all. This actually I thought was a good example. So if you take 1 grain of sand, right, you could just blow it off your hand. It weighs nothing. I don't even know what it weighs. But if we were to apply this fallacy, the whole sandbox shouldn't weigh anything at all. Get it? That's a fallacy of composition. We know for a fact that you put a bunch of sand together, it weighs something. It takes a lot, but it weighs something, right? So each part, it's this assumption, you make the assumption that what is true about a part is true about the whole thing. Okay? In the book, they give you even a better one than the one I gave you. Like a sandbox. So if there's 1 grain of sand, it's actually a grain of sand in the sandbox is not true about the whole thing, about all the sand together. I'm trying to think about, let's think about this in terms of cars. If, let's say you're a Ford person, okay? There's these people that are Ford people, and then there are people that are Chevy people, right? You know what I'm talking about. And let's say you're a Ford person, and you've had, because you decide that Ford is the best maker of American cars, because you've had this one car by a Ford. You bought that same car over and over again. And the truth is, that's a fallacy of composition. Why? Because there's only one example. One example does not equal a whole company doing well with all its other cars. And and those of us that drive cars, we know, right? You could I used to have a Ford Escape. The Ford Escape now is different. I think it's a lot better, actually, a lot nicer. They've updated it a lot since in 2001 when I used to have it. And I don't have that car anymore. But the point is, there's a Ford Escape, and then there's like other Ford Fiesta. I don't even know if they still have those or not. But they're not all equal, right? One little part of the whole company, the cars they represent the company, don't represent the whole company because all the parts aren't equal. Let's move on because I'm already at 10 minutes. I told you it was going to be long. Okay, I really want you to understand these. And it's really the point of this for me. It's more important that you are able to analytically look at these arguments and be able to say, something isn't ringing true. What's not ringing true and why? And be able to point that out. I don't really care whether you're able to identify it and name it. More important to say, what's wrong with this? Okay. If you can identify and name it, great. But it's more important that you recognize that something is off. Fallacy of division. Falsely assuming the whole is true about each part. Falsely assuming the whole is true about each part. You can use the same argument, right? It's the opposite. Talking about the whole of the company means or it could be, it's kind of the same thing. Let's take my example. The Democratic Party is advocating the forgiveness of student loans. All Democrats have bleeding hearts. Okay, well, there's a lot of assumptions in there. But the idea is when you say that, let's go back to like what's happening in the news right now, right? If you're not a Republican, and the Republican Party has changed over the years, but you're not a Republican, and you don't believe in the very conservative views that a lot of Republicans have, but people who are Democrats often refer to the Republican Party as all people that are Republican are conservative and, want to, get rid of abortion, have prayer in school, and give money to the rich. I'm just making this up. I mean, I don't even know, but it's a negative attitude and it's putting people all in one category. My parents were Republican. They did believe in abortion. They believed in a woman's right to choose. So you don't have to be, my parents aren't here anymore. But the point is, just because you're part of this group, you can't assume that everyone has the same idea or says the same thinking about something. Okay, fallacy of division, falsely assuming the whole is true about each part. There's people that identify with Republican principles but vote differently. There's people that identify as Republican but didn't vote for Donald Trump. There's people that identify as Democrat and didn't vote for Biden. So there you go. Okay, we got one more. We're going to get this in now. False dilemma, presenting two alternatives that is inappropriate or misleading. You are either for or against abortion. If you're for abortion, you are against life. So the false dilemma, always focus on, you only have two things. It's presenting the alternatives as if they're the only alternatives. And if you're for that, you're against something else. Okay? So I'm a wolf. Let's say this. I believe in, this is a perfect example. You all know I'm a wolf advocate. I went to a talk years ago when they were first talking about before wolves came to California. And there were people that we call them anti-wolf people, wolf haters or anti-wolf people. Again, this is on my side of the group, right? And they said, because I was there, I was pro-wolf and pro the conservation and pro the protection of wolves. I must have been vegan. I didn't wear leather. I didn't eat steak. I was all these things, right? So if you're a wolf advocate, you have to be against ranchers. That's what I'm saying. That's a false dilemma. Fallacy. Okay, we're going to stop there. We're going to pick it up. Are we having fun yet? I'm having fun. This is really fun.